Tori, and today I'm going to be reviewing Flight of the Wildling by Marguerite Vance. This is the story of Empress Elisabeth of Austria, who is known as Sissi, and there were actually some very popular movies made about Sissi starring Romy Schneider that came out in the 50s, and I love those movies, so I was really excited to read this book. It was published in 1957, and it has some excellent illustrations by J.L. Pellicer. So this book was really interesting. I couldn't decide if it was a biography or historical fiction. The edition I have was actually discarded from my library, and you can see it was listed in the biography section. And I think it's aimed at kids, maybe like middle school aged. And it is very factual, it has a lot of good information, but it also reads like historical fiction. There will be lots of scenes where Sissi is having conversations with people, and you know what she's thinking and feeling. So it has a lot of kind of historical fiction elements mixed in with all the biographical stuff. So this book ends up covering most of Sissi's life. It starts with her courtship and engagement and then wedding in 1854, and it ends with her death in 1898. And a little over half of the book is spent on her meeting Emperor Franz Joseph, who would become her husband. And the reason that this story is so popular and people love the movies and it's just been retold so many times is that Sissi wasn't actually supposed to marry Franz Joseph. It was supposed to be her sister. But when Franz Joseph saw Sissi, he fell madly in love with her and insisted that she must be the one he married. And she was, I believe, 15 at the time. The reason this is called Flight of the Wildling is that Sissi is known for being a very free-spirited and independent person. She grew up in Bavaria and spent all of her time running around in the mountains, and she was very close with her father, and he took her hunting, and she was very free-spirited, and she didn't plan to marry Franz Joseph, and according to both this and the movies, he had to kind of talk her into it. In the movies, I think they took some liberties with how they met, but basically the idea is that she was free-spirited and just sort of stumbled upon him, and he insisted that they get married and didn't really give her a whole lot of a choice. And then once she was Empress, she famously had a very hard time getting along with her mother-in-law. Franz Joseph's mother was very controlling and wanted to be in charge very much, and Sissi didn't know what to do in court or how to act. She was very repressed by all the courtly traditions and rules and the expectations of being Empress. And the tone of this book is actually very interesting because at the beginning, it paints her as almost a victim and how she was swept up in this. She didn't ask to be Empress, it was just kind of thrust upon her, and once she was there, she didn't really know what to do. She wasn't allowed to raise her own children, and she just kind of stumbled from thing to thing. She loved horses, and she tried to work with that for a while. And so for most of this book, the first half is everything that leads up to her marriage, and that is all very sympathetic toward her. In the first few years of her marriage, the book kind of paints her as a victim and as someone who didn't know what to do, and it wasn't really fair to ask her to be in such a restrictive environment. But then, probably about 3/4 of the way through the book, when Sissi has been Empress for a while, suddenly it starts portraying her as lazy and not willing to do her job and neglecting her duties, which was really strange because in the beginning she was the victim who was thrust into this and didn't want it, and then by the end she is this horrible queen who refuses to do her duty. And that was kind of a strange tonal shift. I don't really know where that came from. It could be partly because this book was written in the 50s when it was very common to just expect people to be like meek little housewives, and maybe that was coming through. I don't quite know. The author didn't really give anything to back up why she changed her opinion or why she decided to make Sissi so much less sympathetic later on in the book. So reading this book definitely made me want to learn more about Sissi. I would like to read something that is much more factual and just cold hard statistics and more the facts we know about her, because this did definitely take a lot of liberties, and the films I've seen definitely do take a lot of liberties. So I would like to know more about the events of her life. She had a very tragic and unhappy life. She was beloved by her people. There's this famous painting of her that's everywhere. Everyone thought she was beautiful and wonderful, and they just adored her. But she was definitely a pretty unhappy person. She never really enjoyed being Empress, and she had kind of a sad life. So I definitely want to learn more about her, but this book was a very good introduction. If you keep in mind that it did have a lot of kind of fictionalized things that the author put in to make it more interesting, and you can tell what those would be, you know, opinions and conversations and things that we can't know, then it does give you a really good introduction to information about Sissi. And I would definitely recommend this for anyone who just wants to kind of learn a little bit about her.